Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Illinois Green Party series with your hosts, David Rich and Calvin Tomasco. Calvin, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm excited for tonight's topic.
As am I. I'm very excited. So we have on tonight's special guest, Les Begay, with his tribal affiliation name, Dene, right?
Dene, yes.
Dene, okay. Les is the founder of the Indigenous Peoples Day Coalition of Illinois. So welcome to the show, Les. We're both very excited to have you on.
Thank you. Glad to be here on the first day of Native American Heritage Month.
Perfectly, yeah. And I didn't even realize that. So I looked at the calendar, today, and I was like, "Oh, perfect! This is great." So very fortuitous, as they say. So let's get right into it because we have a lot to discuss. Why don't you tell us about how and why you founded the Illinois Indigenous People Coalition?
Well, the Indigenous Peoples Day has been a movement that's been going on since '77, and cities and states are changing Columbus Day and replacing it with Indigenous Peoples Day, and it's for the reasons that Columbus was not is not someone who should have a day honored. I mean, he abused and Native women and young girls. He started the slave trade by taking Native people back to Europe, and then the African slave trade started from that. Forget the fact that he never even made it this far north, but he's credited with it.
Right.
So here in Illinois, I had worked at the American Indian Center. I was on the board for 5 years, and we were working on it. And then the pandemic hit, and everything kind of came to a halt. So my co-founder and I decided that if we didn't pick it up and continue to work on it, that would probably just go away. So we have been working primarily with the Cook County Board. Also, we've done some work with the city, but the mayor has said that she is not, and she has no interest in changing the date. We're also working with the state. There's a House bill right now that's for Indigenous Peoples Day, but that's a little bit longer process with the state than it is the board. So, as I mentioned, it's something I'm passionate about. I think that it's true history that people should learn about, because in school you're taught very little about Native contributions, and what you are taught is that Columbus founded this country. That Thanksgiving was between the Pilgrims and the Indians, which is another myth.
Yeah.
You might read something about the victory at Little Bighorn, but after that you don't really hear anything. So if on this day of social justice and racial equality, we should have our day, and we should also be recognized as well.
Absolutely. Well said. You need to strike when the iron is hot, which is the phrase I tried to get out of my mouth last week at the end and couldn't. That was so absolutely. That was the time to get this out there so people could understand what actually happened. Can I just ask you one more time, just clarify, sure. Mayor Lightfoot is not interested in doing what?
No, she is not interested in changing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day.
I thought that was a federal government decision. It's a national holiday.
Well, Columbus Day is, but we're trying to get her to change it to Indigenous Peoples Day. She says she is not changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. She has no interest in doing that.
That's okay. That's weird.
For Chicago.
Yeah.
Okay, Calvin, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah. I'm saddened that we don't have as much education and just some general information. The populace just is seemingly unaware. It is a sad social and political blind spot. And I wanted to start just with, we're a place called Illinois, and a city, Chicago, is where I live. And I want to know, and I want our audience to know, what has happened to the Native people that were here. So wherever you think we should start off, let's start there and hear the history.
Well, they were like all Native people in this continent. They were displaced. Prior in 1491, Native people controlled all 2.4 billion acres of land here in the U.S. It's now the U.S. Today, we only have 56 million acres, which is reservation land.
Right.
So they were all moved off by Western expansion, by manifest destiny, by broken treaties, removal. I mean, the U.S. government had a policy from the very beginning of termination, assimilation, and getting the land. And as they continue to move westward, they needed land because land is not a commodity that there's plenty of here. So the land was needed, and Native people were in the way. And that's why they moved out here. They continue to remove them, keep pushing them out. Like the Trail of Tears started in the southeast, which was really the major one.
Yeah.
They wanted the land. They wanted to grow cotton down there, and they moved them to the Indian Territory, which was now Oklahoma. But even after they landed there, they continued to take reservation land away from them with the Dawes Act and the Homestead Act and other acts. So there's a history of just taking land away and moving Native people out.
Yeah, and then of the folks that stayed behind, I guess how many Native and Indigenous people do we have in Illinois still today that just they're not part of a recognized reservation somewhere? Because there is no reservation in Illinois that we
that's correct.
clarified. Yeah,
that's correct. There are about 100,000 in the state of Illinois, 60,000 here in Chicago, Cook County, I'll say. But the last census, again, we were miscounted for a lot of reasons because we live in very remote areas. So not only here, but other places. So, there's only about 4 million enrolled Native people in the U.S. And when I say enrolled, I mean that you, as a Native person, to be considered Native in the eyes of the U.S. government, you have to be enrolled in a tribe. There are 574 federally recognized tribes. Each one has their own qualifications for citizenship. And if you do not have your little card that says, I am a member of this tribe, then you're not considered Native. Now, that was put into play primarily by blood quantum. And that was put into place by the U.S. government because they wanted to end support of Native in the treaties. So by doing blood quantum with intermarriage within tribes, and then outside of the tribes, eventually that bloodline would go away. And that's why today there's 4 million. Prior to Columbus, estimates are about 20 million Native people were here. Today there are 4 million.
Wow.
And there's another probably 2 million that identify as Native. They have Native blood, but they don't have enough Native blood to be considered a citizen in any tribe. So your grandparents could be 100% Native in their different tribes. They marry. You have children, but you marry someone outside of your tribe. So by the 3rd generation, and certainly by the 4th generation, if you marry outside of your tribe, you could be 100% Native, but not enough to be considered a federal Native by the U.S. government.
Good Lord, it almost sounds like the 3/5 clause in the second article of the Constitution. I mean, like just how the government divvies up your cultural personal identity like that. It's disgusting.
Right.
And I know that this is a big problem with censuses in general. Just the identity, up until somewhere in the 60s, the federal census, the people would just walk around, house to house. How many people do you have in here? And they would actually, of their own volition, be like, "Oh, you look white," and just check off the white box. They wouldn't even ask. And eventually, they got to the point where they would ask, and the person finally gets to identify, how they want to identify. According to their own lineage and their own measurement of their lineage, and not some abstract governmental.
Right. I have a quick story about that. I was recently going through some papers of my father's, who was in World War II, and at that time you were either white or black. And in his discharge papers, he had white written down.
Wow. Yeah,
which is an eye opener for me to see that.
That is an eye opener. It's just very peculiar, but I'm guessing they did it. Well, they did it because of racial reasons. I'm sure that's why.
Right.
And I know that the African American soldiers from World War II got about 0, perks after the war. The ones who survived that white people did. So hopefully that worked out a little bit better for your grandfather. But it still doesn't make it right in the first place.
No.
Can we talk about reservations? Because I know that a lot of people don't understand what that means. I know there was just this. Was it last year, where the Supreme Court gave a bunch of jurisdiction back to the tribes in Oklahoma concerning a certain area of Oklahoma, and everybody's thinking, oh, that means all the white people or Americans got to move away. And it turned out to be more like, like the police can't really arrest the tribal members there, that kind of thing. It had more to do with like legal jurisdiction than it had to do with actual land ownership. Do I have that right?
Right. It was McGurk versus Oklahoma that went to the Supreme Court. And really it was a matter of legal and jurisdiction, because on reservations, they're tribal police, but they cannot arrest and detain anybody that is not native. So that's a federal offense, so that the feds have to come in and arrest that person. What happens many times is that someone will come in, commit a crime, leave the reservation, and the tribal police can't go after them. And the feds don't get there. They're not there, so it'll take them a while to get there. So there's a lot of crimes committed on reservations by non-native people that just go undocumented. And that's a real crisis with missing and murdered indigenous women. That's the issue with that, is that people come in, men come in, and then they kidnap or murder Native women, and there's no way for the tribal police to go after them. So that case was about land that was supposed to be given up in a treaty, but apparently the paperwork wasn't done or something. And so it's considered tribal land. So it's really about jurisdiction. And that's why this McGurk decided to take it to court, because he wanted to be tried under the tribal system rather than the state of Oklahoma.
And it came down to a treaties that was signed, right? Like back in the 1800s, which, like you said, there's probably dozens of examples of the U.S. government breaking those treaties. They didn't care. That was just to put a little pause in the action so they could recollect. That's just a joke. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, they've broken every treaty that they ever wrote.
Right. Yeah.
And they were, and many times with treaties too, they would find someone within the tribe, wasn't a leader, but they would find somebody within the tribe who would say, yes, I'm a tribal member. They'd get them to sign a treaty, which really meant nothing. But then they could say, we have a treaty, you violated it, and they could go on and do what they wanted.
That's so crazy. Just grab anybody. Here's a pen. Would you mind just kind of scratching here?
Well, I also have to think about, there's, at that time, they didn't speak English. And so they were told, by some interpreter who probably didn't know that much either, that it was probably good for them. And they were probably going to get something from it. But, also the concept of giving up land doesn't register, because Native people don't think of land as theirs. I mean, they're caretakers of it, but they don't own the land. They can't sell the land. They can't give up the land because they don't own it. That's the mindset. So when they sign a treaty, typically they wanted fishing and hunting rights and to keep the treaty intact with land, but all those were broken.
Right. That's an interesting, very interesting cultural difference too. And I don't know how, to what extent, how many, in any other area of the world besides Europe. Europe seemed to bring over this notion of like property as, this is mine and I can do whatever I want with it and you can't. Instead of property meaning, this is what I'm here, this is my responsibility, this is what I'm taking care of. Two totally very different things.
Right.
Can you speak at all to that notion of property and the differences between indigenous people and their notion of it and, say, Europeans?
Well, it's communal. It's communal land. It's no one owns the land, and right. And the different tribes shared the land too. So it's not as if this is mine and I own it and I'm going to settle here, because many of them were nomadic, but not all of them were. But even if they weren't nomadic, they didn't feel like they owned it. There's Native people believe in 7 generations, that you have to plan for 7 generations out. So if you can't plan that far out, you have to think that far out, then you have to think about how you're going to pass on this land to your 7th generation. So, the thought is it's Mother Earth, and the water is her blood. So that's why the preservation of water rights and land rights are so important to Native people, because it's not a commodity that I own. It's something that I share. I'm just a caretaker of it for this period of time, that I pass it on to the next generation and the next 7 generations.
Yeah, take that thought of private property brought over here, and just look at one of the worst examples of it. It'd be one thing if these folks were just using their land only for growing food and what they wanted with it. That way they didn't harm others. But we have examples like what's going on with oil companies right now, trying to build oil pipelines through treaty land, land that is supposed to be safe from harm. And they're going to actively build something to go through there. And you would think, because you don't hear it in the news, that, oh, oil pipelines are relatively safe. I only hear about an oil spill every once in a great while. Well, that's what makes it onto, and I hate to go on a huge tirade, but onto corporate-owned news. If you look at who owns CNN, who owns MSNBC, they're both mega corporations. In fact, the two mega corporations that own most of cable in this country. And you go on down. Who owns the Washington Post? Well, that's Amazon. So that might be a bad filter to be hearing about another mega corporation, an oil company, and how many oil spills they have. And I wish I had that pulled up right now, but I do remember that there are hundreds of oil spills a year of different severities, and they all affect the watersheds. And we had a guest on previously, Dan Tweed, talked about watersheds a little bit and how much, like, if you look at the watershed map of the Mississippi, it is enormous. It is like 40% of U.S. land is watershed that goes into one river. So you are affecting Mother Earth's bloodlines. You're affecting all of our lives as well when you do that. Could you tell us a little bit less about what's going on with Line 3 and what's happening with these pipelines being built?
Well, with Line 3, they're trying to go through Minnesota. There's an old pipeline that that is leaking. There's spillage now, and it has continued to over the years. They want to build a new pipeline and leave that one as is, and say that they will repair it. But we know that that's never the case. So not only do they want to leave the old one there, but they want to build a new one that's closer to the watersheds and to the river. So it's of course through native property. One thing that people don't know about either is that the Department of Interior is the one that negotiates the leases of the pipelines. So the process is supposed to be, you go to the tribes and you ask them, we're going to put a pipeline through here, and this is why we want to do it. Do you have objections? You know, they always say yes, we do have objections, but the Department of Interior always has the last word. That is because from the very beginning, when reservations started, in the Supreme Court law of 1823, Johnson versus McIntosh, Native people are only occupiers of the land, and the land is held in trust for them. So the thought was Native people can't negotiate this on their own. So that has never changed. The U.S. government still owns trust of the land. So the final say goes to the Department of Interior, and they always, in their own best interest, say, yes, the pipeline should go through, as well as negotiate the royalties. It's gotten better, but it's still, the Department of Interior has the final word. Now, the new Secretary of Interior, Deborah Haaland, who's Native, she's making that more aware of that, and she's giving the tribes more say than they used to have. Because in the Dakota Pipeline, and even in Line 3, the tribes have said, no, we don't want it to go through here. And originally the Dakota Pipeline was to go farther north through a non-white area. And of course they said, no, we don't want to go on through here. Send it down south. So that's what happened. So that's one of the real problems of the Department of Interior. There's a conflict of interest there. And even on my reservation in Arizona, they opened up uranium mines back in the 50s.
Ooh.
And then when they knew the causes and the health causes that would happen, but they didn't say anything to the tribal members. And then when they decided they didn't want to do it anymore, they just left. And they were supposed to clean up these mines, but they didn't. So the water table in most parts on the Dene Reservation is contaminated. There's huge cases of birth defects, cancer, still today because of this. They knew what they were doing, but they didn't care. They wanted the minerals in underneath.
Right.
And that's really what's going on with the pipeline. It doesn't benefit anyone but these companies that want the oil, to sell the oil.
And
Yeah, what you just said probably sums up most of like America's governmental history. Is they knew what they were doing, they just didn't care.
Right.
I'm sorry, Calvin, go ahead.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to hammer home to our audience. I mentioned it last week with our, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago with our interview with Black Alliance for Peace when we were bringing up the police. And line 3, the police are torturing protesters over there. They're pushing on pressure points on anyone who chains themselves to machinery. And those pressure points are nerves, and they're damaging the nerves and giving some people Bell's palsy, I believe it's called. Where they can no longer operate their face. So they're literally, police are literally torturing people over this oil company trying to pollute our water sources. It's a really disturbing thing going on. I hope we can spread some awareness on that. Sorry to bring up such a downer, but.
Well, I mean, you saw the police and the military presence at the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a military invasion. And private army, but nonetheless, military.
Yeah, and hoses when it's freezing degrees out. Yeah. Terrible.
Wow. Yeah, no, they were interviewing some cops at some point there that towards the end of it, I remember one cop talking about how this is always going to be oftentimes will be a cop's go-to defense is that this is somebody else's property, not theirs, so they have to go.
That's pretty ironic, isn't it?
It's extremely ironic. Yes, definitely hypocritical, contradictory, ironic, paradoxical, all sorts of rational problems there. Can we get back to Illinois specifically and talk about the history thereof? Because I really wanted to get to a couple of things. Abraham Lincoln and how great he was not. And secondly, why are there no reservations in Illinois? If you could tie those two together somehow or talk about them whatever order you want, it's up to you.
Well, the reservation issue is as I mentioned earlier, is as settlers kept moving west, the original inhabitants kept getting pushed farther and farther away. And the reservations that were here were moved to Nebraska and Kansas, some in Wisconsin, and they just moved out. They weren't large tribes to start with, but nonetheless, they were moved out of here, and then nothing happened to land here. But that's not unusual with a lot of states. There's no reservation land. And of the 574 tribes that I mentioned, federally recognized tribes, only about 250 of them actually have reservations because they've been moved off the reservation and it's been stolen from them, and they've been displaced. They just don't have a reservation anymore. Yeah. Abraham Lincoln, a couple of things that he did that were helped the Western expansion for non-native people was the Morrill Act, which was in 1862, and that was a land grant. So they sold land, public land, native land. Let's say what it was. They put it up for sale, and the proceeds of that went to universities to start universities. They were the endowments of them. Oh, wow. So there are some universities today that are still, because the money that was gained from that is supposed to be used in perpetuity. So there are some still colleges today that are still getting money from that, from leasing that land to other people.
Really?
Yeah, and it was about 12 million acres of land, which is all native land. They just decided to take it and they moved them off. 52 colleges benefited from that. And about 20 years later, that same act, the Morrill Act, helped 16 HBCU colleges found their college. It gave them, because they felt like that right around the Civil War time, they didn't have, blacks couldn't go to college. They wouldn't go to college. They wouldn't allow them to go to college. Mm. So the HBUs came out of that. So 16 of those did. The only land grant college in Illinois is the University of Illinois. So that was a big land grab, and the only, the colleges benefited from that. But the thing about that, as well as they benefited from taking land from Native people, and you would think that those colleges would go out of their way to try and employ Native staff, Native faculty, have Native curriculum. or even give Native scholarships or free tuition to some of these in some of these places, but they don't as a rule. Most of them don't. There's a few that do. The other act that really wiped out most of the reservations was the Homestead Act, also of 1862. 240 million acres were taken of native land. If you were 21, hadn't fought against the U.S., and were willing to go west, you would get 160 acres of land. And if you worked on it for 5 years and improved it, that land was yours. The title was yours. Now, where do you think that land came from? That land also came from Native people. Right. 240 million acres of that. So that's why there's reservations have been reduced, almost completely. But it also tells you why there were none in Illinois. Most of the land was taken from the Midwest and the West. And to get back to the land grant for a minute, because the land that they were giving away or stealing was in the Midwest, the people, the schools in the East that wanted land and didn't have land, didn't have public land or reservation land, they could get vouchers, land vouchers for the Midwest and the West, and they could sell it and then benefit from that and put it in their endowments. So, everyone benefited but Native people. Right. Not only did we lose, and that land wasn't just taken. I mean, it was fought over, and many died for that.
Right. So, when it comes to, I'm getting some feedback.
I got an echo here.
Yeah. Oh, that's weird. Let me try to adjust that. Or is it gone? Oh, we're safe. Okay.
Gone on my side, yeah.
I don't know why that happened. So when it came to displacing people, especially from Illinois, I guess it's left up to the textbooks or some people's interpretations is this false idea that the Native people were this disorganized, hunter-gatherers only, and there weren't real settlements or anything that you could call that. Perhaps there were tiny examples of that, but can you tell us a little bit about what the cities were like in Illinois before being forcibly displaced?
Well, as I mentioned before we got on the air about Cahokia, at its peak, which is I think around 11 and 1200, it was the largest city in the world. They did trade between Cahokia and Chicago, down into Mexico, down the Mississippi River. Wow. It was a large, like I said, it was the largest city in the world. There were cities not only here but also in Central and South America and Canada as well. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the highway system and the road system in Chicago is basically the routes that Native people used when they were here prior to 1491. And I'd also like to talk about Chicago for a minute, where John DeSable is considered the founder of Chicago because he's the first non-white or non-indigenous settler, which to me is an insult that we don't matter. If it's the first non-indigenous settler, then we don't really count. But he's given credit for it. But what DeSable did, the best thing DeSable did, was he married well. He married a Potawatomi woman, and she was the one that negotiated, with the other tribal members. She knew the language, he didn't. She'd been here, she'd helped him. She's not given credit for anything. Her name's Kittihala. She's not given credit for anything, but that she was the one that helped him set up this. And they weren't even here that long. Then he moved to Missouri. But he's given credit because he's the first non-indigenous settler, which is a slap in the face. To me, it means that we don't count, that we didn't matter, that although we had cities and towns here for hundreds of years before John DeSable ever thought about coming here, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I think that if you kind of look at the sum of the tribes that were here before, Native Americans, indigenous people that were here before Europeans even got here, the lineage can actually go back about 10,000 years. Now you get into like differences in like evolutionary development, that kind of thing. But yeah, no, I mean literally at least 10,000 years. Now what you're saying is spot on, and it's the same thing with Columbus getting credit for discovering America. You can't discover something if there's already people there. To discover something means you're the first one at it, to it. That is not the case. You can invade an area where there are already people there, which they both did. But they did neither discovered anything. It's ridiculous, and it's absolutely shameful. It's one of the reasons why we needed to get rid of Columbus Day. Well, he doesn't deserve the credit for it.
And Columbus, a lot of that goes back to the Doctrine of Discovery, because that was in 1493. Papal bull that said basically if you weren't Christian, then we could take over this land because you're not Christian.
That's exactly right.
And if you weren't persuaded, or you weren't convinced, or you weren't, then we could either kill or enslave you to take the land because you weren't Christian. That came from the Pope.
It literally came from the Pope, and I want to say Nicholas VI or something like that, but it was in in the 1400s. He said pretty much gave Spain and most of Europe permission to go ahead and do all that they did. And it's unbelievable. A lot of people don't know that the Catholic Church is massively responsible for everything that happened there.
Yes, and the Supreme Court cited that in a land dispute in Georgia in 1823. Chief Justice Marshall used that as a reason that Native people could not sell their land unless they could sell it to the U.S. government because the United States inherited the land from Europe when they defeated them. So therefore, they became the owners of the land, and Native people were only occupants of the land. And that was in 1823.
Man.
So, but John Marshall just cited the Doctrine of Discovery.
Then to keep going along the Catholic route, we have the horrendous stories. I'm hearing mainly from Canada, but it's not limited to Canada. It also happened in the U.S. Territories, and that is where. Oftentimes they would, as my understanding goes, take children in the sense of we're going to modernize and civilize you, and we're going to separate from you from your tribes. And then it turns out that is not even what happened. What happened was many of these children were murdered. It looks like. Can you talk to that some, Wes?
Right. Well, it happened just as much here. The only reason you're hearing more about Canada is because they've actually owned up to the fact that the boarding schools were wrong, and there's more attention about it. But it was just as bad here, if not worse. The boarding school started here in the late 1800s, and it was started in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by an ex-Civil War Union general. His motto was the only way to help Native people was to kill the Indian and save the man. So that meant taking them away from their families, cutting their hair, punishing them for speaking their language. And in many cases, they died. I mean, most of these boarding schools had cemeteries on the property. And at this point, between Canada and the U.S., there's over 7,000 recorded grave sites at this point, but there are more. We just haven't here in the United States opened up and admitted and actually gone in and done what Canada's doing. At least the Canadian government apologized. It doesn't do much good now, but they at least apologized. The United States has never done that. But yes, these boarding schools were horrible. And like I said, based on the premise that to kill the Indian and save the man, you punishment was okay. And if they died along the way, and a lot of these places were shorthanded. They didn't have adequate facilities for health care. And a lot of these kids died from diseases that they were had never seen before or been exposed to. And a lot of them died from running away. These kids were as small as 7, 8 years old. And they wanted to go home. So they would run away and they would die from exposure.
Sure.
Yeah, they were ripped from their families. That was the beginning of the atrocities, that they were who was doing that and how? Why did that happen? The actual seizing, who would come in and do that? Was this mercenaries or was this straight up like the U.S.
Cops?
Was it Catholics? Yeah. Was it the church?
It was a combination of the church and the U.S. government.
Okay.
They both went in and did that, saying that we're here to help you're going to help your children, and parents didn't want them to leaving. Again, you're talking about when this first started. These parents didn't speak English. They didn't know what they were saying, but they didn't really have a conversation with them. It was just they came in and would take your kids. There's stories about this from generations past, and that I've heard from survivors of the boarding school system, where when they saw a strange person come around or a non-native person come around, they would hide the children because they were afraid that they were going to take the children away from them.
Yeah.
It's brutal, and it's unbelievable that this happened, and there's been no reconciliation or apology from the church or the U.S. government.
The church hasn't said anything about it, really? The Pope?
No.
So I guess it was in the 80s or something like that where they finally said sorry about Galileo, but okay. So yeah, I guess it's probably going to take some time.
Right.
I wanted to ask real quick, because we can talk about this happened in the past, but I want to know how recently has this occurred? Because to my understanding, there are some people who are still waiting for someone to return.
Oh, you mean bodies of them?
Yeah, either bodies or
really?
Get it.
Families are still waiting for.
Right.
Really?
Yeah, because when they didn't keep proper record of this either,
No.
I assume. So
Okay.
No,
Sure.
and in some cases, I know that there were mass graves, but there were no record of who was, what children were where, or which ones died. So it's just passed on through generation of, my child went to boarding school and never came back, and how do you prove that now? But as I said, Canada has done a better job of investigating that and going to these schools and trying to find the remains. They haven't really done that here in the U.S. A couple places, but not much. And I think it's a lot about owning up to the guilt. In the minds of the U.S. government and the Catholic Church is, we were doing this for you. We were helping you.
Well, you see, that's okay.
We just try to make it better for you.
It sounds like the CPS, Child Protective Services nowadays, their slogan is, the best interest of the child. Crap.
Right.
And that's what justifies them yanking babies away from their parents. Okay, sorry.
When was
well, the other thing that so one of the things they used to do too is they'd take kids away from their parents for adoption to non-native families.
Yeah.
They used to go on quite a bit in the up until the 50s and 60s, and then the Indian Child Act came in. I forgot the date on that, but now it's harder, but not impossible to do that.
I wanted to. I was just really curious. When was the last boarding school, and when was the last boarding school shut down?
I think they were shut down in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s.
1970s?
Yes.
Oh,
I mean, they weren't
Yep.
they weren't like they were in the 1800s, but they were still taking kids off of reservations, and not by force.
right.
But in the 60s and 70s, a lot of kids chose to go there because they had changed, but also because there weren't schools on the reservations. And also, if there were schools, there were small schools, and there was no way to get there because there wasn't a school bus and they didn't have cars. So some parents decided that if they would send them to a boarding school, where they'd have housing and they'd have meals and they would have interaction with other tribes. It wasn't, like I said, it was in the early 18 and 1900s, but the boarding school still existed to the late 70s and I think the early 1980s.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that's because my understanding when I first heard about the one in Canada, British Columbia, Vancouver, maybe, I thought it had shut down in the late 1800s. I didn't realize they were still going on, obviously in a different manner entirely, but
Right.
still, nonetheless, still the legacy, I didn't realize, continued on. Can we talk about, okay, so we have the topic of reparations going on for the African American community. We have the topic of land back for the indigenous people of America. Can we talk about that? Land back, like actually giving land back, like, hey, this is yours? Go ahead.
I know there's a few instances where I know there was one in the Northeast, and there's one on I think California gave some land back to a tribe. But that's not going to happen in any large part. No one's willing to give up land and give it back to Native people. And what you're seeing more of is tribes that are buying back their land. And again, the irony of that is it was stolen.
Yeah.
And now I have to get it back. I have to buy it back from the person that stole it from me.
From my thief.
But you're seeing more of that because some tribes have more financial means, and they're able to buy some of their land back, which is great that they're able to do that. But there was a case in that was settled in 1980 where the Lakota sued the U.S. government for breaking a treaty, the Fort Laramie Treaty, and the Supreme Court ruled in their favor.
Nice.
So the Supreme Court gave them a financial settlement, and the tribe said, no, we want the land. We want the land. And that's still sitting in a bank somewhere because the tribe has never taken it. They want the land. They want the Black Hills. It's primarily the Black Hills, which is sacred land for them. And they wanted the land rather than money. And now and this was in 1980. So that there was millions of dollars. I can't remember what the settlement was, but it's millions of dollars now. It's done 3 times, 4 times what it was when they settled in 1980. But again, it's about the land. It's not about money. It's about the land.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you can see that too with some of the other places in the U.S. like Bears Ears in Utah. I mean, there's 3 tribes there that's sacred land of theirs, and that's been a political battle for the last 3 administrations. President Obama expanded the protection, and then President Trump came in and reduced it by millions of acres.
Oh,
now President Biden has reclaimed it again and said we're keeping this sacred land of the people. Chaco Canyon in New Mexico is on my reservation. That's a sacred place too, and it used to be drilling couldn't be done within 15 miles of it, and now it's down to 3. And they're doing fracking, and they're afraid that the structures are going to fall. I mean, it's like fracking in the Colosseum in Rome. Are you okay with that? But it doesn't seem to matter. And then there's other places too. I mean, even the Black Hills, they're starting to, they want to go back and do some gold mining there because they think there's some more gold there. And there's a place in Phoenix. So it's today's manifest destiny is still taking land and under reservations, because really what they want is what's under the land, and the land itself, but also what's under the land. Between gas, oil, natural gas, oil, and uranium, there's about $2 trillion worth of mineral rights underneath these reservations that private industry wants to get to.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I want to remind folks that rivers are not the only water system that we have. Rivers are air exposed. We have something called underground aquifers that are also flows of river and part of the watershed. And fracking does affect those as well as mining would affect those.
Fracking is dangerous stuff. I had a friend who has a degree in geology talking about it, and she's actually was a consultant on a couple of fracking sites. She says that it is possible for fracking to be done safely and well, but it's extremely difficult to do it that way. Therefore, most of the times it goes bad. So she's like, just stop doing it because you can't get it right enough. So but they're going to keep doing it.
And their interest is not to do it safely. Right.
It's too expensive.
Yeah. So we just want to get to what's underneath. We don't care how we do it.
There you go. We know what we're doing, but we don't care. Yeah. That's America.
I wanted to highlight just something that bothers me, and that's when people use the word tribalism to mean a negative thing. Tribes were great. Tribe nations were amazing. And I implore people to use sectarianism because that's what they're referring to. They're referring to people caring about their own sect of or group or inner group.
Right.
So yeah, that really bugs me when I hear somebody say,
well, and there's
tribalism in a negative
like
way.
That too. Yeah. The one I really dislike is when they say, he's gone off the reservation.
Oh, wow.
I don't like that. I hear that more often than you would think. And let's smoke a peace pipe over this, or let's have a powwow over this. It's funny, but it's not funny, right. Because those are phrases that you wouldn't hear with any other group of people. But it's okay with us because we've been taught that it's okay through movies and media. So and that's the image that people have of Native people, is that we all look one way.
Right, exactly. I just saw a meme, I guess, of old Bugs Bunny cartoon, and I used to watch Bugs Bunny all the time. And I remember watching this as a kid, and obviously didn't process it until recently. He was sitting there shooting. It was like an Old West kind of thing, and he's shooting Native Americans, with the one feather and that kind of thing, the whole stereotype. And they're falling down as he shoots them, and then he'd pull back and be like, and he'd mark it down. He'd be like, one Indian to one little. 2 little, 3 little Indians, boom, 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 4 little, 5 little, 6 little Indians. And I was just like, holy cow. Kids were watching this. I mean, it was just creepy. Right. I mean, so all the age-old stereotypes that happen through media, through Hollywood, TV networks and so on, those things are still out there in one way or another, for sure.
Right. And the mascots are a big part of that too.
So we're going to say the Washington Redskins, and then recently now they're still, I think they're just
the Chicago hockey team. The Chicago
Blackhawks. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Atlanta Braves. Right. Things like that. Yeah.
And some people, some Native people say, we have bigger battles to fight than mascots, which is true. We do, but it starts there. If you're dehumanized and people don't think of you as human and as a caricature, then how are you going to move on to bigger issues? You can't. Because people have this stereotype of you, and they don't take you seriously if they think of you as some 1800 Western movie person. So it does start with mascots. There are bigger issues, but it has to start there. Also, child psychologists have found that it's very it's hard on children to see themselves that way, Native children to see that way, and they're being made fun of and bullied. And their self-esteem is low because of that. But and you can hardly imagine why not. When you're told that you look. And I don't know if you saw this one recently. This teacher was dressed up with a paper headdress.
Yeah, I saw the video of it. She was loony. What happened? What was she doing?
Yeah. She was demonstrating something about Native people. I guess it was a section they were having, and that was her interpretation of what they should know.
It was crazy.
Dressing up and doing it. Yeah, that was. But that's. He
was like jumping on the desk and all over the room and stuff.
Doing the war hoops and the whole thing.
Yeah,
And I think she's been suspended, but I doubt she'll be fired.
I wanted to ask, what are some political issues or actions that you would like to see for the Indigenous community? Or if you could speak on behalf of some of the Indigenous community, what they would like to see.
I don't speak for them all, but I do. One of the things I think that has to happen, regardless of what issue it is that we have to have a seat at the table. Change doesn't come unless you're involved with the decision making, and there's very little Native presence in any government body other than certain states. I mean, there's here in Chicago, there are different departments for Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinx, but there's no office or representative for Native people here or elsewhere. And CPS, there's no Native people there that are involved with the curriculum. So it starts with being recognized and being allowed to sit down and make decisions as well. But
I want to clarify: Chicago Public Schools, not Child Protective Services.
Yes, right.
Oh no, that's important. That's important. Yeah.
Sorry.
That is. But housing is an issue. Employment on reservations is an issue. And as one I mentioned earlier, missing and murdered Indigenous women. That's a huge issue. I mean, 1 in 3 Native women in their lifetime are going to be attacked or murdered, missing or murdered. Another issue too that not many people know about is per capita, Native people from 18 to 35 are the group that's most often shot by police officers.
Could you say that again, please?
Per capita, percentage-wise, the 18 to 35 age group, Native people they're more often shot by police officers than any other group of people.
Wow. I did not know.
And you don't hear about that because those shootings happen near reservations, near border towns. And because people don't know where reservations are, or really care about Native people, it's not publicized. But it's true. We're shot more often than any other group of people, per capita.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's also that the people who own the media, so local Sinclair groups, again mentioning the corporate-owned media of CNN, MSNBC, they don't care to report it because it also highlights the corporate interests of things like oil pipelines and land ownership and real estate. So,
and another reason they don't report about it or care about it is because, as I mentioned earlier, there's only 4 million of us. So in their minds, it's not enough to matter because there's only 4 million of you.
And they're also, they spend the last 4 weeks on one, attractive blonde white woman,
right?
Gabrielle or whatever, Gabby, whatever her name is.
Yeah.
And they won't shut up about that. I mean, it's awful what happened to her. Please don't get me wrong.
Well, I know.
There's a lot more going on more.
And Native people have said the same thing. We're sorry that it happened, and we pray for her family. But what about all the over 7,000 Native women that have been missing and gone? And an interesting thing too, which you should observe this month, is that when there are other months like Black History Month and Asian American Month, usually every night on a newscast, they'll say something about, and today in African American history or in Asian American, this happened or this person. I watched a little bit of the news today, the outlets, and I didn't see even a mention of Native American Heritage Month today. And I doubt if you're going to see anything after today, if even today, that you see anything about Native people or this is what happened in Native history. So it's the erasure is almost complete. Many people, and I do a lot of talks, and people are surprised sometimes that I'm even alive. They think that we were all killed off in the 1800s. And as shocking as that sounds, I've had people come up to me and tell me that. So they think that there's like I said, the erasure has been complete. Native people don't exist in many people's minds, except for the images they have that the media has portrayed it as. So to get back to your original question, the changes that have to occur have to have us to be in the process of making those decisions and going forward. And until that happens, not much is going to change, I'm afraid.
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that Facebook link so we can, if we don't have a good news feed that's properly covering this, we can go direct to a good source and start following. There's going to be stuff posted all this month, right?
Right.
And then if I may, I wanted to go back to Indigenous Peoples Day, and I wanted to talk about this coalition because you sent me the document that has everyone who's signed on, and it is lengthy. It's multiple pages of groups behind this. This is no meager coalition. This is gigantic. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes, we have about 180 organizations that have signed on as supporters, and they are from the Latinx, African American, Hispanic, Asian, Muslim, Jew, Christian, CPS, Native American Rights Fund. I mean, it's a very diverse group of organizations. There are about 36 elected officials on there too, from the state and local government.
Nice.
As I said earlier, we were trying to get the Cook County Board to replace Columbus Day with this. We sent over 5,000 emails to the 19 commissioners from their supporters and constituents asking them to change the day, which they just basically ignored. They didn't say anything about it. And it's 5 times, we were told it was 5 times more than any issue they've ever had come up in emails. So they just ignored those 5,000 emails that we sent them. At this point, we delayed the vote because we only had 5 of the 9 votes we needed of 17 board members. 17 board members, only 5 of them felt that it was worthy enough to vote yes for. And this is a group that just about a month ago, Cook County Board had Racial Equity Week. During that Racial Equity Week, they had no speakers or information or programs about Native people at all. So, my question was, what's the point of that if you don't even have Native people involved? And if you can have Racial Equity Week and we're not included and you can't find a way to vote for us, then that's kind of a sham, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. That kind of. It totally is. That's very odd to me that especially Lightfoot, that she would be so dismissive about something like that. She seems to be, I don't know how to phrase it, but I mean, she seems to be a little more politically correct than that, if that works.
Well, she actually, when I was at the American Indian Center on the board there, she did talk at the center about making a change, and actually her people did. She didn't come and talk to us, but her people did. But then 2 weeks later, she came out of the newspaper without even giving us a heads up and said, absolutely no, I will never change that. So the people that came and talked to us was just FaceTime. I doubt if she really had any interest in doing it, but she checked it off. Right. Checked it off. I talked to them, and now I can tell them what I really think.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, obviously, and she's embodying this now. That's her disposition towards this. They just think all this stuff is, we don't do that anymore. America's not like that anymore. But you're talking about like pre-1950s America and that kind of thing. I mean,
right.
We have had the civil rights movement, and we've come a long way since then, and we don't have Jim Crow laws anymore and that kind of thing. And you're making everything about race and minorities nowadays. It's not like that anymore, and it very much is. Right. You just have to, you have to stop believing it, like you said, Calvin. CNN, MSNBC, and especially Fox. Good God.
Yeah, where is that? Where is that? Where it's not like that anymore? Tell me where that is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The same people, like being a bartender, these same people who dismiss it and just like, it's ridiculous, will turn around and like drop the N-word or say something really stupid. I'm like, whoa, okay, it's clearly still there.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. It's and if you doing like, Kelvin and I do research for the show and all sorts of different topics concerning these similar types of things. And I have an inexhaustible amount of data about things still happening now. So don't give me this. It's we don't do that anymore crap. Because it still happens. Easily.
I wanted we on the show, we love our labor unions, our worker cooperatives, and I just wanted to say good job and solidarity to the unions that have signed on to this. I believe last time we spoke, it was the Chicago Teachers Union.
Yes.
And then I'm missing a couple others. I know that there were a couple other unions. Do you remember them offhand, Les?
No, I'm sorry. I can't think of them offhand, but
Democratic Socialists of America are on there.
Right.
Yeah. There's a bunch. Hopefully, is it all right if I share this list in the links?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll let people know. But speaking to my union fellows, people in the working class, if you know a union or a worker cooperative, let's get them signed on. So bring this up at your next meeting. Thank you so much, you out there in the audience.
Absolutely. We have about a minute and a half left, and I think you're going to be another guest, Les, who we're going to, after the show, ask you to come back and actually schedule a date, because there's too much. I haven't even talked about cops yet, and we alluded to it a little bit here and there, but just real quick, I saw a video, I don't know how, it's got to be within the last year or so, where these 2 U.S. cops were like giving a citation to an indigenous person on a reservation, and all of a sudden you see this truck pull up, this guy gets out, and he's like, get the off my parole. And the cops are like, okay. Like they they screwed up their jurisdiction.
Right.
They had none, and they tried to give a citation, and the guy was not having it. And it was one of the most beautiful things when to see cops run away with tail between their legs. I loved every second of it. But I want to talk more about that. So yeah, let's try to get you back on the show. And I want to talk about like just the history, what was Native, the different tribes and what they're like, socially, politically, economically. I know that there was, we like going back to this whole like idea of condescendingly using the word tribe or tribalism, that kind of thing. And you're right, there's nothing wrong with the word. My best friend who's getting his PhD talks about his tribe in Kuwait all the time. That's how they're classified the sect. Right. It's okay. It's not. It's like using the word family. It's just expanded. Okay. So I want to talk about all those sorts of differences and that kind of thing too. So let's get you back on.
But Les,
climate change, that kind of thing. So good.
Yes, definitely. Before we sign off, I just wanted to give you a chance to speak to the audience directly. If you had any instructions for them, visit the Facebook, any events to look forward to. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Well, you did put the Facebook page up there. You can go on there and you can also sign on as a supporter. And as I mentioned, we're going to have something every day this month about something that happened in history and Native history, as well as we're going to have a calendar of events that are going on this month with the Native speakers, movies, places you can go and enjoy the month with some Native history and the events. So go to the Facebook page, sign up as a supporter. Also, the Cook County has not voted yet, so there's still time to contact your commissioner and tell them that you want to make the change to Indigenous Peoples Day.
All right, I want Lightfoot on this show. That's it. I've had it. Okay, thank you so much, Les, the guy, Danae. Is that your? Yeah. Danae? Okay, thank you so much for coming on the show again. Fascinating stuff and really, really important topics to talk about and learn about. People need to know this. They need to know the history of their own nation. And all the atrocities that happened thereof. Again, there's an inexhaustible amount of data on just how awful this country has been. Awful. All right, thanks for tuning in to the Illinois Green Party series with your hosts, David Rich and Calvin Tomasco. Calvin, how are you?
I mean, this was super impactful. Thank you so much.
Yes, it really is. It really is. I'm going to go call my buddy who's getting his anthropology degree. And be like, did you watch the show? Anyway, till next time, be good.